I transferred $5,000 into my ex-husband's account the same afternoon he handed me divorce papers. And I didn't cry. Not when he told me I wasn't fit to raise my own child. Not when he said another woman was carrying the son he actually wanted. Not even when he slid a black credit card across the table like I was something to be paid off and dismissed. If you're wondering what kind of woman walks away from her marriage, her home, and even her child without a fight, I used to wonder that too. But what I did next is something he never saw coming. And if he had, he never would have let me walk out that door. The coffee shop sat tucked into a quiet side street in Lincoln Park, the kind of place where people lingered over their drinks and spoke in low voices. The ceiling fan above us creaked in a slow, tired rhythm, and for a moment I focused on that sound just to steady myself. Andrew sat across from me, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his cufflinks catching the light every time his fingers tapped impatiently against the table. That tapping, it used to comfort me. It used to mean he was thinking, planning, building something for us. Now it just meant he couldn't wait to leave me behind. "I've already signed," he said, sliding the papers toward me without looking up. His voice was calm, almost bored. "This doesn't have to be complicated, Rachel. Just sign, and we can both move on." Move on. The words sat between us like something rotten. I picked up the papers, scanning the lines even though I already knew what they said. 5 years of marriage reduced to legal language and bullet points. Assets divided, responsibilities reassigned, my life condensed into clauses. "I'll let you keep the condo," he added, finally meeting my eyes. "It's fair, considering everything." Considering everything. That was his way of saying he was keeping the house, the car, the company's shares, and most importantly, our son. "I'm keeping Ethan," he continued, leaning back slightly, his tone sharpening just enough to make it clear this wasn't up for discussion. "He needs stability. He needs a certain standard of living. You can't provide that." There it was. Not anger, not even cruelty, just certainty, the kind that cuts deeper than anything else. I felt something inside me shift, not breaking, just settling into place like a final piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to solve. "And Sophie?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened for just a second before he smoothed it over. "That's not relevant." Not relevant. The woman carrying his child, not relevant. I almost laughed, but the sound caught somewhere in my throat and died there. He reached into his pocket and placed a glossy black card on the table, pushing it toward me like a tip at the end of a meal. "This should cover your transition. You'll be comfortable." Comfortable. I stared at that card, at the reflection of the overhead lights sliding across its surface, and for a brief second, I saw myself the way he must have seen me. A cost, a liability, something to be settled. I pushed the card back toward him, slow and deliberate. "I don't want it." That made him pause. Not long, just enough. I set the papers down, folded my hands in my lap, and looked at him the way I used to when I trusted him, the way I used to when I believed we were on the same side of something. "I'll sign," I said. Relief flickered across his face, quick and unmistakable. He reached for the pen immediately like he was afraid I might change my mind. But I have one condition. That stopped him. His hand hovered mid-air, pen just inches from the table. "A condition?" he repeated, the words sounding foreign coming out of his mouth. I nodded. "I don't want the condo. I don't want alimony, and I won't fight you for custody." Now he was really looking at me, confused, curious, a little suspicious. "Then what do you want?" he asked. I held his gaze steady and calm. "I want to take your mother with me." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. For the first time since I sat down, Andrew didn't have an answer. And in that moment, I knew something he didn't. He thought he was getting rid of a burden. But what he had just handed me was the beginning of everything. Andrew blinked like I had just spoken a language he didn't understand. For a moment, he just stared at me, searching my face for a crack, a sign that I was joking, desperate, or out of my mind. When he didn't find one, something else took its place. Relief. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice lower now, careful. "I am." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, and I watched the tension drain from his shoulders like a man who had just been handed a miracle. That was the first time it truly hit me. Not when he asked for the divorce, not when he said he was taking Ethan, but right then, when the idea of giving away his own mother felt like freedom to him. "You want to take care of her?" he said, almost cautiously, like he didn't want to scare the opportunity away. "Yes." A slow smile crept across his face, the kind he used in business meetings when a deal turned in his favor. "That's generous of you, Rachel. Generous." I almost let that word sit there, untouched, but something inside me tightened. "She's your mother," I said quietly. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he reached for his phone, his thumbs already moving across the screen, efficient, decisive, like he was closing another transaction. A second later, my phone buzzed on the table. I didn't have to look to know what it was, but I did anyway. A bank notification. $5,000 transferred. "That should cover her expenses," he said, not even glancing up. "Consider it back pay for everything you've done. And her first month, at least. Back pay." For a second, I couldn't breathe. Margaret Collins had worked 2 jobs to put him through college, sold her house to help him start his first company, and now he was assigning her a price, $5,000. I locked my phone and set it aside, my fingers steady even though my chest felt like it was caving in on itself. "You're a smart woman," Andrew continued, his tone shifting into something almost condescending. "Most people would have taken the clean break. You're choosing a burden instead. I hope you know what you're doing." I picked up the pen. "I do." The paper didn't shake under my hand. My signature came out clean, sharp, final. When I finished, I pushed the documents back toward him without hesitation. He took them immediately, lifting the pages and blowing gently on the ink like it mattered, like any of this had ever been about anything more than convenience. "Well," he said, standing and adjusting his tie, "I think that settles everything. Everything." He tucked the papers into his leather folder, already half turned toward the door. "Just make sure you keep your word," he added over his shoulder. "If something happens to her, don't bring her back here. From now on, she's your responsibility. Not mine. Not mine." I sat there, watching him walk away without looking back. The glass door closed behind him with a soft click, and just like that, 5 years of my life disappeared into the late afternoon crowd. For a while, I didn't move. The coffee in front of me had gone cold, a thin layer forming on the surface. I lifted the cup and took a sip anyway. Bitter. Flat. It settled in my mouth the same way everything else had, quietly, without drama. I thought about the house, the one I had cleaned, decorated, filled with warmth that no one ever acknowledged. I thought about Ethan's small hands in mine when he was a baby, the way he used to look at me like I was his whole world. And then I thought about the way he looked at me now, like a stranger. A slow breath left my lungs, and for the first time all day, something inside me felt clear. I stood, gathered my bag, and walked out into the fading light. The air had that early evening chill, the kind that hinted at something changing just beneath the surface. By the time I reached the driveway of the Collins estate, the sky had turned a dull shade of gray. The iron gates opened with a long, hollow creak, and I stepped onto the path I had walked 1,000 times before. The garden I used to tend was still there, trimmed and perfect, but it felt different now, lifeless, like something beautiful that had been left behind too long. Inside, The house smelled different too. Not like cinnamon and warm meals and something lived in. Now it smelled like perfume. Sweet, heavy, overpowering. Sophie. I found Margaret in the kitchen, sitting at the small table near the window. A plastic tray sat in front of her, the kind you get from a microwave. The food on it had gone stiff, untouched except for a few scattered bites. She was hunched over, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes unfocused as she stared at nothing. For a moment, I just stood there. This woman had built everything Andrew had. Every inch of his success rested on her sacrifices, and this was how he let her live. I walked toward her slowly and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "Margaret," I said softly, "I'm here." Her head lifted, her cloudy eyes meeting mine. There was confusion there, fragility, but beneath it something flickered for just a second, something sharp, a glimpse of the woman she used to be. Then it was gone. "Rachel?" she whispered. "I'm taking you with me," I said. "We're leaving." Her fingers closed around my arm suddenly, tighter than I expected. Not weak, not lost, clinging. Like she had been waiting for someone to say those words. And as I stood there, helping her to her feet, I had the strangest feeling that I wasn't the one rescuing her. I was stepping into something I didn't fully understand yet. Something Andrew had just handed away without ever realizing what it was worth. Margaret's grip didn't loosen even after we reached the door. If anything, it tightened, her fingers digging into my sleeve with a quiet desperation that made my chest ache. I slowed my steps, adjusting my pace to hers, careful not to rush her, careful not to let her feel like she was being dragged out of a place that had already abandoned her long before I walked back in. "It's cold," she murmured faintly as the front door opened, her voice thin but aware. "I know," I said softly, wrapping my coat more securely around her shoulders. Just a few more steps. The driveway stretched ahead of us, long and familiar, but it didn't feel the same anymore. Every step away from that house felt like peeling back a version of my life that had never really belonged to me. Behind us, the door remained open for a second too long, like the house itself was watching. Then I heard it. "Well, this is unexpected." Sophie's voice. I didn't turn around immediately. I didn't need to. I could already picture the expression on her face, perfectly composed, slightly amused, just curious enough to make everything feel like a performance. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she added, her tone lighter now, but edged with something sharper underneath. I helped Margaret down the last step before I turned. Sophie stood in the doorway, one hand resting casually against the frame, her other arm folded across her waist. She looked immaculate, of course. Soft cashmere, polished hair, that same expensive perfume that had swallowed the house whole. "I'm taking her with me," I said simply. Her brows lifted just a fraction. "Are you?" "Yes." She studied me for a moment, her eyes moving slowly, deliberately, like she was trying to figure out what had changed. "That's a big responsibility," she said after a pause. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I didn't answer right away, not because I didn't have one, but because I realized something in that moment. She wasn't asking out of concern. She was measuring me. "I am," I said. A faint smile touched her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Andrew didn't mention this. He doesn't need to." That made her pause. Just long enough. "Well," she said, straightening slightly, "I suppose that solves a problem for everyone." A problem. Margaret shifted beside me, her fingers tightening again, and I felt a quiet anger rise in my chest, steady, controlled, but unmistakable. "She's not a problem," I said. Sophie's smile sharpened just a little. "Of course not," she replied smoothly, "but let's not pretend this isn't convenient." Convenient. I held her gaze. not blinking, not looking away. "For you," I said. For a second, something flickered across her face. Then it was gone. She let out a soft breath, almost amused. "You've always been more emotional than practical, Rachel. I guess that hasn't changed." "No," I said quietly. "It hasn't." And for the first time since I had walked back into that house, I didn't feel small. I turned away before she could say anything else, guiding Margaret toward the car. The cold air bit at my skin, sharp and clean, but it felt real, honest. Behind us, I heard the door close. Not slammed, not gently either. Just closed. I helped Margaret into the passenger seat, adjusting the belt carefully across her shoulder. She watched me the entire time, her eyes clearer now than they had been inside. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would." Her lips trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached out and touched my hand, her fingers lighter this time, but steadier. "He used to be kind," she said suddenly. "Andrew, when he was little." I paused. "I know." She shook her head faintly like she didn't believe it anymore. "No, you don't understand." Her voice dropped, almost urgent. "There are things you don't know." Something in the way she said it made my stomach tighten. "What things?" I asked gently, but she only looked at me for a moment longer before her expression shifted again, the clarity slipping away like it had never been there. "It's cold," she repeated softly, her hand falling back into her lap. I closed the car door slowly. As I walked around to the driver's side, her words echoed in my head. "There are things you don't know." I started the engine, the low hum filling the quiet space between us, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. The gates opened, then closed behind us with a heavy, final sound, and for the first time since this all began, I felt it. Not relief, not yet, but movement, like something had been set into motion that wasn't going to stop. As we drove down the empty road, Margaret's breathing evened out beside me, her head leaning slightly against the window. The world outside blurred into gray and shadow, the sky heavy with the promise of rain. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Andrew thought he had just gotten rid of a burden. Sophie thought this was convenient. But somewhere deep in my chest, something told me they had both made the same mistake. They had let something go without ever understanding what it really was, and I had the feeling we were all about to find out. The road stretched ahead in a long, quiet line, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The rhythmic hum of the engine filled the silence, steady and grounding, but my mind kept circling back to Margaret's words, the way her voice had sharpened for just a moment before slipping away again. "There are things you don't know." I glanced at her. Her head rested lightly against the window, eyes half closed, her breathing slow but uneven, like sleep kept brushing past her without fully taking hold. "Margaret," I said gently, keeping my voice low, "can you hear me?" Her lashes fluttered. You said there are things I don't know about Andrew." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "What did you mean?" For a second, nothing happened. Then her fingers moved slightly against the fabric of my coat, gripping it just enough to tell me she was still there. "Not safe," she murmured. A chill slid down my spine. "What's not safe?" "Him," she whispered, barely audible. He wasn't always like this." My grip tightened on the wheel. "Then what changed?" Margaret's brow furrowed faintly, as if she was trying to push through something thick and heavy in her mind. "Money," she said after a long pause. "And her, Sophie." I exhaled slowly, my eyes fixed on the road. "What about her?" Margaret didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, and I thought she might have slipped away again, but then she shifted slightly, turning her head just enough to look at me. For a brief moment, her eyes were clear, sharp in a way that didn't match the fragile way she held herself. "She watches everything," Margaret said. "Smiles but never gives anything away." I felt something tighten in my chest. "You don't trust her." Margaret let out a faint, humorless breath. "You shouldn't either." Before I could respond, her expression softened again, the tension draining out of her face like it had never been there. She turned her gaze back to the window, her reflection faint against the glass. "Cold," she murmured once more. "I know," I said quietly. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of something heavy, something waiting just beneath the surface. By the time we reached my apartment, the sky had darkened, clouds gathering low and thick overhead. I parked the car and stepped out quickly, moving to her side before she had to struggle with the door. "We're here," I said, opening it gently. Margaret blinked up at the building, confusion flickering across her face. "This isn't, no," I said softly. "It's not, but it's safe." The word felt deliberate, important. She studied me for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I helped her out of the car, keeping one arm around her as we made our way inside. The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and old wood, familiar and unremarkable, but to me it had never felt more like something I needed to protect. Once inside my apartment, I guided her to the couch, pulling a blanket over her shoulders. She sank into it slowly, her body relaxing in a way I hadn't seen all day. I moved to the kitchen, filling a glass of water, my thoughts still racing. Not safe. Money. And her. I brought the glass back and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted it to her lips. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to thank me." She looked up at me then, her gaze lingering. "You're different." I paused. Different from who? From them. I didn't know how to answer that, so I didn't try. Instead, I sat down across from her, watching carefully. "Margaret," I said after a moment, "has Andrew ever hurt you?" Her reaction was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but clear. Her shoulders stiffened, her grip on the glass tightening just a fraction too much. "He doesn't need to," she said. Something cold settled in my stomach. "What does that mean?" But she shook her head, looking away. "You shouldn't ask questions you're not ready to hear the answers to." The room fell quiet again, the kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides. I leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, trying to steady the growing unease inside me. Then my phone buzzed on the table. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. I glanced at the screen. Andrew. For a moment, I didn't move. It buzzed again and again. Margaret's eyes flicked toward it, her expression tightening in a way that told me everything I needed to know. I reached for the phone, my fingers hovering over the screen for just a second before I picked it up. I didn't answer, but I didn't ignore it either, because something told me this wasn't over, not even close. The phone kept vibrating in my hand, steady and relentless, like Andrew was used to getting an answer and didn't know what to do when he didn't. I stared at his name on the screen, the familiar weight of it pressing against something that no longer belonged to him. For years, that name had meant authority, expectation, obligation. Now it just felt distant. "Don't answer," Margaret said quietly. I looked up at her. She hadn't moved, but her eyes were fixed on me clearer than they had been a few minutes ago. "I wasn't planning to," I replied. The phone stopped. For a second, the silence felt almost too loud. Then it buzzed again. This time, a message. I hesitated before opening it, not because I cared what he had to say, but because I wanted to understand the tone behind it. "Where are you?" Short, direct, no greeting, no concern. I almost smiled. Another message came through before I could respond. "You took her without telling me." That one made me exhale slowly, without telling him, as if he hadn't just signed away his right to ask. I set the phone down on the table without replying. "He won't stop," Margaret said. "I know." Her fingers tightened slightly around the blanket. "He doesn't like losing control." Something about the way she said it made me sit a little straighter. Control over what? Her gaze flickered to the phone, then back to me. Everything. Before I could press further, the phone rang again. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to hear him, but because I wanted him to hear me. "What?" I said, my voice calm, almost indifferent. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected that tone. "Rachel," he said, sharp now. "Where are you?" "At home." "With her?" "Yes." Another pause, heavier this time. "You should have told me," he said, his voice tightening. I came back and she was gone. I let out a small breath, leaning back into the couch. "You knew I was taking her. That doesn't mean you just disappear with her without a word. A word." I closed my eyes briefly, steadying myself. "Andrew, you signed the papers. That's not the point. It is the point." Silence. Then his tone shifted, just slightly. Not softer, just more controlled. "She's not well, Rachel. You don't know how to handle this. You'll get overwhelmed." I almost laughed. "I've been handling everything for 5 years," I said. "I think I'll manage." "That's not the same," he snapped. "This is different. She needs professional care." "No," I said quietly. "She needs someone who doesn't treat her like a problem." That landed. I could hear it in the way he stopped speaking for a second too long. "Don't twist this," he said finally, his voice colder now. "You made a choice. That's fine, but don't pretend you're doing something noble here." I opened my eyes and looked at Margaret. She was watching me, not confused, not distant. Watching. "I'm not pretending anything," I said. "Good," he replied, "because you need to understand something. If this becomes too much for you, you don't get to just bring her back." I let the silence stretch this time. Then, very calmly, I said, "I won't." Another pause. "You're serious?" he said. "Yes." I could almost hear the shift in him, the calculation, the quiet realization that this wasn't temporary, that I wasn't going to call him in a week or a month asking for help. "Fine," he said finally, his voice flattening. "Then don't call me when things fall apart." "I won't." I ended the call before he could say anything else. The quiet that followed felt different this time. Not tense, not heavy, just settled. I placed the phone back on the table, my hand lingering on it for a second before I let go. Margaret was still watching me. "You didn't flinch," she said. I frowned slightly. "What?" When he spoke, she clarified. "You didn't flinch. I hadn't even realized it." "I guess I'm tired of flinching," I said. Something softened in her expression, something that looked almost like approval. "He notices that," she said. "He won't like it." I met her gaze. "That's not my problem anymore." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Margaret shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket around her shoulders. "He thinks you're alone," she said quietly. I felt a faint chill at those words. "I'm not." Her lips curved just a fraction. Not quite a smile, but close. "No," she said. "You're not." I leaned back, letting that settle in my chest. For the first time since I had walked out of that house, I understood something clearly. Andrew thought he had simplified his life. He thought he had removed complications, cut off obligations, cleared his path. But what he had actually done was remove the only person who ever held everything together for him. And he didn't know it yet, but he was about to find out. The first night was quieter than I expected, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes right before something shifts, like the air itself is waiting. Margaret fell asleep on the couch sometime after midnight, her breathing uneven but steady enough that I didn't wake her. I covered her more carefully with the blanket and turned off the lamp, leaving only the soft glow from the hallway. I didn't sleep. I sat at the small kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me, staring at emails I hadn't checked in weeks. Bills, reminders, automated updates, normal life, still moving forward like nothing had changed. But everything had. Around 1 a.m, my phone lit up again. Not a call this time. An email from Andrew. Subject line: documents. I stared at it for a long second before opening it. Attached were copies of the divorce papers, the same ones I had signed. But there was something else, a separate file. I clicked it. A scanned document appeared on the screen, the legal language dense, precise. I skimmed the first paragraph, then slowed as something caught my eye. Relinquishes all responsibility for the care, financial support, and legal guardianship of Margaret Collins. My chest tightened. I kept reading. Transfers said responsibility voluntarily and permanently. Voluntarily. Permanently. I sat back slowly, the words settling into place in a way that made my pulse start to pick up. This wasn't just emotional distance. This wasn't just neglect. This was legal. He hadn't just walked away from his mother, he had erased himself from her life. I scrolled further. Witnessed and certified, a lawyer's signature, a date, today's date. My eyes flicked back to the top, reading it again, slower this time. He had done this deliberately, carefully. He hadn't hesitated. Something cold and sharp moved through me, not quite anger, not quite shock, something else, something more focused. Behind me, I heard a faint movement. I turned. Margaret was awake. She hadn't moved much, but her eyes were open, watching me from across the dim room. "You saw it," she said quietly. I hesitated. Yes. She didn't ask what I thought. She didn't need to. Instead, she shifted slightly, sitting up straighter, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. The change in her posture was subtle, but it was enough to make something inside me sharpen. "He always was thorough," she said. There was no confusion in her voice, no fragility, just clarity. I stood slowly, laptop still in my hand, and walked closer. "Margaret," I said carefully, "do you understand what he signed?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes." The word landed heavier than anything she had said before. I lowered myself into the chair across from her, searching her face. "Then why didn't you say anything?" A faint smile touched her lips, but it wasn't soft. It was tired, knowing. "Would you have believed me?" she asked. I didn't answer, because I didn't know. She let out a slow breath, her fingers smoothing the fabric of the blanket absently. "People see what they expect to see," she continued. "And Andrew, he's very good at making people expect the wrong things." My grip tightened slightly on the edge of the laptop. "He made everyone think you weren't aware." "Yes." There was no hesitation in that answer, no embarrassment, just acknowledgement. My heart started to beat faster. "How long?" I asked. Margaret's eyes met mine again, steady and unflinching. 2 years. The room felt smaller suddenly. "You've been pretending for 2 years?" "Yes." The simplicity of it made it harder to process. "Why?" I asked. She studied me for a moment like she was deciding something. Then she said very quietly, "Because I needed to know who my son really was." The words settled between us, heavy and final. "And now you do," I said. Her expression didn't change. "Yes." I exhaled slowly, trying to keep my thoughts from racing ahead too fast. "And Sophie?" Margaret's gaze shifted slightly, something colder flickering beneath the surface. "She's not the cause," she said. "She's the result. I felt that. Deep. He was already changing, she continued. Money just made it easier. I looked down at the document still open on my screen, the clean lines of legal language outlining something so deeply human and broken it almost didn't belong there. He gave you away, I said quietly. Margaret didn't react to the words themselves, but her hands stilled. Yes, she said after a moment. He did. Silence filled the space between us again, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It was clear, defined. I closed the laptop slowly, my mind moving through everything I had just learned, everything I hadn't seen before. You knew this was coming, I said. Margaret's eyes softened slightly, but her voice stayed firm. I hoped I was wrong. And now? She held my gaze. Now I know exactly what he's capable of. A quiet chill ran through me. Not fear, awareness. I leaned back slightly, letting out a slow breath. Then we need to be careful. Margaret's lips curved faintly, something sharper in her expression now. Careful? She repeated. Yes. For the first time since I had met her, she gave a real smile. Small, controlled, but unmistakable. No, she said. My brow furrowed. No. She leaned forward just slightly, her eyes locking onto mine with a clarity that made my chest tighten. We need to be prepared. The difference between those two words settled in my bones. Careful meant avoiding something. Prepared meant facing it. I felt something shift inside me then, something aligning in a way it hadn't before. Andrew thought he had closed a chapter. He thought he had removed a problem. But sitting there, in that quiet apartment, with the document still fresh in my mind and Margaret looking at me like she had been waiting for this moment, I realized something. This wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of something he would never see coming. I didn't go back to sleep after that. By morning, the apartment felt different. Not smaller, not heavier, just sharper. Like every detail had edges now. The light coming through the blinds cut across the floor in long, clean lines, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't drifting through my own life. I was paying attention. Margaret was already awake when I stepped into the living room, not sitting the way she had the day before, folded in on herself, distant. She was upright, a cup of tea in her hands, her gaze steady as she watched the steam rise. "You didn't sleep," she said without looking at me. "Neither did you." She gave a small, almost amused breath. I haven't needed much sleep in years. That wasn't what she meant. I moved to the kitchen, pouring myself coffee, my thoughts still circling everything she had told me the night before. 2 years. Pretending. Watching. Waiting. "You were collecting information," I said, turning back toward her. She didn't deny it. "Yes." "How much?" Margaret finally looked up, her expression calm, but there was something underneath it now, something precise. "Enough." That word settled into me in a way that made my pulse pick up slightly. Enough for what? She set her cup down carefully on the table. Enough to understand what he's been doing. And what has he been doing? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached for the bag I had carried in the night before, the old canvas one she hadn't let out of her sight. I had assumed it held clothes, personal things. I was wrong. She placed it on the table between us, unzipping it slowly, deliberately. My eyes followed the movement, a quiet tension building in my chest. Inside wasn't clutter. It was organized. Folders, papers, a small notebook, worn but carefully kept, and something else, a flash drive. My breath caught slightly. Margaret noticed. "Sit," she said. I did. She pulled out the notebook first, flipping it open with practiced ease. Pages filled with tight, controlled handwriting, dates, numbers, notes. This, she said, tapping one page lightly, is the date Andrew moved company funds into a personal account under Sophie's name. My stomach dropped. I leaned forward, scanning the page. The details were precise. Transaction amounts, times, account numbers partially written, enough to identify, not enough to expose. That's not, I stopped myself, legal. It wasn't legal. Margaret turned a few pages. Here, she continued, her voice steady, is the loan he took out 6 months ago. High interest. Unsecured. He told the board it was for expansion. And it wasn't, I said quietly. She looked at me. No. The room felt colder. What did he use it for, I asked. Margaret's lips pressed together slightly. Speculation. Speculation? Cryptocurrency, she said, the word almost dismissive, at her suggestion. I leaned back slowly, my mind catching up piece by piece. He risked company funds on that? He risked everything, she corrected. Silence stretched between us. I looked at the notebook again, then at the bag, then at her. You've been tracking all of this for 2 years, I said. Yes. And he had no idea. Margaret's expression didn't change. He never thought I was worth noticing. Something about that hit harder than anything else she had said. I exhaled slowly. And the flash drive? She reached for it, holding it between her fingers for a moment before placing it on the table in front of me. Copies, she said. Of what? Everything I could gather. I didn't touch it yet. How? I asked instead. How did you get all this without him knowing? Margaret's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like pride. People talk when they think no one is listening. I thought about that, about the way Andrew had spoken in front of her, around her, like she wasn't there. You recorded him, I said. Yes. The word landed without hesitation. My pulse quickened. Margaret, this is serious. I know. This could destroy him. Her gaze held mine, unwavering. I know. There was no anger in her voice, no satisfaction, just certainty. I looked down at the flash drive again. And you're giving this to me, I said. Yes. Why? That made her pause. For the first time since this conversation began, something softer moved across her expression. Not weakness, not doubt. Something else. Because he chose, she said quietly. And so did you. I didn't fully understand that, but I felt it. You took me out of that house, she continued. You didn't have to. You chose to. I swallowed, my throat tight. And now, she said, pushing the flash drive slightly closer to me. I'm choosing you. The weight of that settled into my chest in a way I hadn't expected. This wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just information. It was trust. I reached out slowly and picked up the flash drive, feeling the cool metal against my fingertips. And what do we do with it? I asked. Margaret leaned back slightly, her posture calm, but her eyes sharp. That, she said, depends on how far you're willing to go. The question hung in the air between us, quiet but undeniable. I thought about Andrew, about the papers, about the way he had looked at me across that table like I was something already finished. I closed my hand around the flash drive. Then I looked back at her. All the way, I said. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. A quiet, unmistakable shift, like a door had just opened, and there was no going back. The first time I plugged in the flash drive, my hands didn't shake. I expected them to. I expected hesitation, doubt, something human and uncertain to slow me down. But there was nothing. Just a quiet focus that felt unfamiliar and strangely steady. I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, Margaret across from me, watching without speaking. The drive mounted instantly. A single folder appeared. No label, no explanation, just silence. I clicked it. Files unfolded across the screen, organized into neat rows. Dates, audio recordings, scanned documents, Financial statements. It wasn't chaos, it was structure, intentional, careful. My chest tightened. She hadn't just been observing, she'd been building a case. I opened the first file. Audio. A low hum filled the speakers, followed by the faint sound of voices. Andrew's voice came through clearly, sharper than I expected, stripped of the polished tone he used in public. "No, just move it. It won't flag if it goes through her account first." A second voice. "Sophie. Are you sure?" A pause. Then Andrew again. "I've done this before." The words settled into me like something cold. I clicked forward. Another recording, another conversation. "The board doesn't need details. They see numbers, not structure. You're going to get audited." "I won't." Confidence. Absolute. Reckless. I muted the file. The silence that followed louder than anything I had just heard. Across from me, Margaret didn't react. "You knew," I said. "Yes." I opened another file. Documents this time. Transfers, layered accounts, patterns. It didn't take a financial expert to understand what I was looking at. Money moved in circles, redirected, disguised. Personal expenses buried inside company transactions. Sophie's name appearing again and again in places it shouldn't. "This isn't just bad judgment," I said quietly. "No," Margaret replied. "It isn't." I leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly, trying to steady the rush of thoughts building in my head. This could trigger a full investigation. That's the point. I looked at her. There was no hesitation in her expression, no second thoughts. "You're not worried?" I asked. "About him?" she said. "Yes." Margaret held my gaze. "I was," she said, "for a long time." Something in her voice shifted then, not louder, not sharper, just final. "I'm not anymore." The room felt still, defined. I turned back to the screen, scrolling through more files, emails, attachments, notes. It wasn't just evidence of financial misconduct, it was a timeline, a progression, a slow unraveling of someone who thought he was untouchable. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. "We can't just send this blindly," I said. "If we do this, it has to be clean, precise." Margaret nodded once. "I know." I pulled up a blank email. No name, no signature, just an address. My pulse picked up slightly now, not from fear, but from the weight of what this meant. "You're sure about this?" I asked. Margaret didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the screen, at the files, at the quiet accumulation of everything her son had become. Then she said, very softly, "He made his choices." I nodded. So did we. I attached the first set of files, then the second, careful, selective, enough to trigger attention, not enough to expose everything at once. My fingers paused over the keyboard for just a second before I typed. Relevant documentation attached, requesting formal review, no emotion, no accusation, just facts. I hit send. The sound was almost nothing, a soft click, but it felt like something much larger had just been set into motion. I closed the laptop slowly. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Margaret exhaled, a long, steady breath that seemed to carry years of weight with it. "It's done," I said. "No," she replied. I looked at her. "This is just the beginning." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Andrew. Again. I didn't hesitate this time. I answered. "What now?" I said. There was no pause, no control in his voice this time. "What did you do?" he demanded. I felt something inside me go completely still. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "I just got a call from finance. There's an audit request. External, immediate." I said nothing. "That doesn't happen without a trigger," he continued, his voice tightening. "And you're the only one who's moved anything since yesterday." I leaned back in my chair, my gaze steady. "Sounds like a problem," I said. Silence, sharp, dangerous. Then, quieter now, controlled again. Rachel, you don't understand what you're getting into. I almost smiled. No, I said. I think I do. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I replied. Or maybe I'm just paying attention. Another pause. Longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Lower, colder. If you think this ends well for you, he said, you're wrong. I felt it. The shift. The moment where this stopped being about control and started being about consequence. I didn't flinch. I guess we'll find out, I said, and I ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was charged, alive. I looked at Margaret. She was already watching me. He knows, I said. Yes. I exhaled slowly. Good. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. Yes, she said. Good. 2 days later, everything started to crack. It didn't happen all at once. Not dramatically, not publicly. It began quietly, the way real damage always does, in places most people never see. But I saw it. The first sign was a message, not from Andrew, from someone else. Unknown number. Are you Rachel Carter? I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. Yes. There was a pause, then another message. This is Daniel Reyes. I used to work with Margaret's husband. We need to talk. My pulse shifted just slightly. I didn't respond right away. Across from me, Margaret watched my expression, reading it before I said a word. Who is it? Someone who knows your husband, I said. Her eyes sharpened. What does he want? He says we need to talk. Margaret didn't hesitate. Call him. I did. The line rang once, twice. Then it connected. Rachel? His voice was older, steady, the kind that carried experience without needing to prove it. Yes. A pause. I'm glad you answered, he said. Things are moving faster than expected. I didn't like the way that sounded. What do you mean? The audit request triggered internal review, he said, but that's not what's causing the problem. I felt something tighten in my chest. Then what is? Another pause. Then, carefully. Your ex-husband made a mistake. That's not new. A faint breath on the other end. Not quite a laugh. No, this one is different. I leaned forward slightly. Explain. He moved funds yesterday, Daniel said, after the audit request came in. My mind sharpened instantly. That's reckless. It's worse than reckless, he replied. It's traceable. I glanced at Margaret. She was already watching me. He's panicking, I said. Yes. And Sophie? Silence. Then, she's not staying quiet. That didn't surprise me. What did she do? I asked. She tried to pull money out this morning, he said. Large amount. Personal accounts. It triggered flags immediately. Of course it did. She's trying to run, I said. Yes. I exhaled slowly. And Andrew? Another pause. He doesn't know yet. That made me sit back. He will. Yes, Daniel said. Soon. The line went quiet for a second before he spoke again, lower this time. You need to understand something, Rachel. This isn't just going to be financial anymore. My grip tightened on the phone. What does that mean? It means once this moves forward, he said, it doesn't stop. I looked at Margaret again. She didn't look away. I understand, I said. Good, Daniel replied, because when it breaks, it's going to break everything. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Margaret didn't ask what he said. She didn't need to. He moved money, I said, after the audit. Her eyes closed briefly. Then it's over. Not yet, I said, but it's close. She nodded once. We didn't speak for a while after that. There was nothing left to say. Later that afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Andrew. I answered. Not calmly, not cautiously, just directly. What now? There was no anger in his voice this time. No control. Just something else. Something raw. Rachel, he said. And for the first time, I heard it. Fear. "What's happening?" he asked. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence sit there, just long enough for him to feel it. "You tell me," I said. "I'm serious," he snapped. But the edge wasn't there anymore. "Something's wrong. Accounts are locked. Finance won't answer me. He stopped, his breath uneven. I waited. Then quieter now. "Did you do something?" I could have lied. I could have deflected. But I didn't. I paid attention, I said. "Silence. Heavy." Then, "Rachel, don't do this." The words landed differently this time. Not commanding, not dismissive, almost pleading. "You already did this," I said. "No," he replied quickly. "This isn't the same." "You're right," I said softly. "It's not." Another pause. Then, more urgent now, "You don't understand how bad this could get." I leaned back, my gaze steady. "I think I do." "No," he insisted. "If this goes where I think it's going, I could lose everything." The words hung there. I didn't answer right away, because for the first time since I had known him, he was telling the truth. "Yes," I said, a sharp inhale on the other end. "Rachel, I could have lost everything too," I continued, my voice even. "But you didn't care about that. That's not—" "It is," I cut in. "You just didn't think it mattered." Silence. Then softer now, almost breaking. "What do you want?" I closed my eyes for a second. Not to think, just to feel the weight of that question. What do I want? Not money, not revenge, not even an apology. I opened my eyes. "I want you to understand," I said. "Understand what?" "What it feels like," I replied. The silence that followed was different. Not resistance, not denial, something else. Recognition. "I didn't think you'd actually," he started, but the words fell apart before he could finish. "No," I said quietly, "you didn't, and that was the problem." I ended the call without another word. When I looked up, Margaret was watching me again. "He's starting to see it," she said. "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Good." I exhaled, the tension in my chest settling into something steadier. "This isn't done," I said. Margaret's expression didn't change. "No," she agreed. "It's not." And for the first time, I realized something clearly. This wasn't just about watching him fall. It was about making sure he understood why. The knock on the door came early the next morning, sharp and deliberate, the kind that doesn't wait to be welcomed. I already knew who it was. Margaret didn't move, but her eyes lifted toward the door, calm and certain. "Open it," she said. I did. Andrew stood there. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Not because he had changed so much physically, but because something essential had slipped. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his hair unkempt like he had been running his hands through it all night. The composure he carried like armor was gone. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, almost unsteady. I didn't step aside. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed, his eyes flicking past me briefly, searching for her. "I need to talk." "You already said everything you needed to say." "That was before," he replied quickly. "Things are different now." "They are," I said. "You should go." He exhaled sharply, frustration rising for a second before collapsing into something else. "Please," he said, and that word didn't belong to the man I used to know. Behind me, Margaret spoke. "Let him in." I stepped back. Andrew hesitated as he crossed the threshold, like the space itself unsettled him. His gaze landed on Margaret and something flickered across his face. Not relief, not guilt. Recognition. "Mom," he said. She didn't respond right away. She sat exactly as she had been, composed, present, watching him with a clarity he had ignored for years. "You're not," he stopped, the words catching in his throat. "You're not confused." "No," she said. The silence that followed pressed in on all of us. Andrew let out a short, broken breath. You lied to me. Margaret tilted her head slightly. Did I? His jaw tightened. You pretended, for 2 years, and you didn't notice, she replied calmly. That hit him harder than anything else. I trusted you, he said. Margaret's expression didn't change. No, she said. You didn't. You stopped seeing me long before that. He took a step forward, his voice rising slightly. That's not fair. No, she agreed quietly. It isn't. He faltered. I watched it happen. The moment where his anger couldn't find anything to hold on to. Everything's falling apart, he said finally, his voice dropping. The accounts are frozen. The board is questioning everything. Sophie. He stopped again, his face tightening. She's gone. I didn't react. Margaret didn't either. She took what she could and left, he continued, bitterness cutting through his words. I don't even know how much is missing yet. Of course she did. That's what happens, Margaret said, when you build your life on things that aren't real. Andrew looked at her like he didn't understand the language anymore. I can fix this, he said quickly. I just need time. You had time, she replied. I made mistakes, he insisted. I know that now. Margaret leaned back slightly, studying him. Do you? He nodded too fast. Yes, I do. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached to the side and picked up a folded document from the table. She held it out toward him. Look at it. He took it, his hands unsteady now, and unfolded the paper. I watched his face as he read. Confusion, then recognition, then something worse. No, he said softly. That's not. It is, Margaret said. He looked up, his eyes wide. I didn't mean it like that. You signed it, she replied. I was under pressure, he said quickly. You don't understand what was happening. I understand perfectly, she said. You traded your responsibility for convenience. That's not true, he snapped, but the force behind it was gone. Margaret stood slowly, not weak, not uncertain, steady. You called me a burden, she said. You decided my life didn't belong to you anymore. His hands shook slightly as he lowered the paper. Mom, please. No, she said, cutting him off. You don't get to ask for that now. The room went still. I could hear his breathing, uneven, strained. I'm your son, he said, quieter now, like he was trying to hold on to something that was already slipping. Margaret's voice softened, just a fraction. My son, she said, would never have done this. That broke him. I saw it. The exact moment something inside him gave way. He sank into the chair, his head dropping into his hands, the weight of everything finally catching up to him. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. No, I replied quietly. You didn't think at all. He looked up at me then, his eyes red, searching, desperate. Rachel, I can fix things. We can fix things. I shook my head. There is no we anymore. His face crumpled slightly, but I didn't look away. You didn't lose me when you signed those papers, I said. You lost me long before that. Silence, heavy, final. After a while, he stood, slowly, like he didn't trust his own legs. He looked at Margaret one last time, then at me. There was nothing left to say. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out without another word. I closed it behind him. The sound echoed softly through the apartment. And just like that, it was over. Margaret sat down again, her hands resting quietly in her lap. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she exhaled, a long, steady breath. I walked over and sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched. He'll survive, I said. Yes, she replied. He will. But he'll remember this. She nodded. So will we. The days that followed were different. Not easier, but clearer. The company stabilized under careful hands. The noise, the chaos, The lies, they faded. What remained was something simpler, something real. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was living my life instead of holding someone else's together. One evening, standing by the window, watching the city settle into quiet, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was done. Margaret joined me, her presence steady beside mine. "We're going to be okay," I said. She smiled. "I know." And for the first time, I believed it. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had to walk away to find yourself again, take a second to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments 3 simple words. I choose me.